Jean-Jacques Rousseau's Second Walk. Having then formed the project of describing the habitual state of my soul in the strangest position in which a mortal could ever find himself, I saw no simpler and surer way to carry out this enterprise than to keep a faithful record of my solitary walks, and of the reveries which fill them when I leave my head entirely free, and let my ideas follow their bent without resistance or constraint. These hours of solitude and meditation are the only ones in the day during which I am fully myself and for myself, without diversion, without obstacle, and during which I can truly claim to be what nature willed. I soon felt I had too long delayed carrying out this project, already less lively. My imagination no longer burst into flame the way it used to in contemplating the object which stimulates it. I delight less in the delirium of reverie. Henceforth, there is more reminiscence than creation in what it produces. A tepid languor enervates all my faculties. The spirit of life is gradually dying out in me. Only with difficulty does my soul any longer thrust itself out of its decrepit wrapping, and were it not that I am hopeful of reaching the state to which I aspire because I feel I have the right to it, I would no longer exist but by memories. Thus, in order to contemplate myself before my decline, I must go back at least a few years to the time when, losing all hope here below and no longer finding any food here on earth for my heart, I gradually became accustomed to feeding it with its own substance, and to looking within myself for all its nourishment. This resource, which I thought of too late, became so fruitful that it soon sufficed to compensate for everything. The habit of returning within eventually made me stop feeling and almost stop remembering my ills. By my own experience, I thus learned that the source of true happiness is within us, and that it is not within the power of man to make anyone who can will to be happy truly miserable. For 4 or 5 years I habitually tasted those internal delights that loving and sweet souls find in contemplation. Those moments of rapture, those ecstasies, which I sometimes experienced in walking around alone that way, were enjoyments I owed to my persecutors. Without them, I would never have found or become cognizant of the treasures I carried within myself. In the midst of so many riches, how could a faithful record of them be kept? In wanting to recall so many sweet reveries, instead of describing them, I fell back into them. This is a state which is brought back by being remembered, and of which we would soon cease to be aware, if we completely ceased feeling it. I fully experienced this effect during the walks which followed my plans to write the sequel to my Confessions, especially during the one I am going to speak of, and during which an unforeseen accident came to interrupt the thread of my ideas, and give them another direction for some time. After lunch, on Thursday, the 24th of October, 1776, I followed the boulevards as far as the Rue du Chemin Vert, which I took up to the heights of Menilmontant, and from there, taking paths across the vineyards and meadows as far as Charonne, I crossed over the cheerful countryside which separates these two villages. Then I made a detour in order to come back across the same meadows by taking a different route. In wandering over them, I enjoyed that pleasure and interest which charming places have always given me, and stopped from time to look at plants in the vegetation. I noticed, too, I quite rarely saw around Paris, but which I found to be very abundant in that area. One is the Picree higher Asioides, belonging to the family of composite plants, and the other is the Bupleverium falcatum, belonging to the family of umbelliferous plants. That would be umbelliferous plants, spelled umbelliferous, umbelliferous. This discovery delighted and amused me for a long time, and ended in the discovery of an even rarer plant, especially in high places, namely the Cerastium aquaticum, which, in spite of the accident that befell me the same day, I have come across in a book I had with me, and have now placed in my herbarium. Finally, after having looked thoroughly at several other plants I saw still in bloom, and which I was always pleased to see even though I was familiar with their aspect and name, I gradually turned away from these minute observations, so as to give myself up to the no less charming but more moving impression which the whole scene made on me. A few days before, the grape gathering had been completed. Strollers from the city had already withdrawn. Even the peasants were leaving the fields until the toils of winter. The countryside, still green and cheerful, but partly defoliated and already almost desolate, presented everywhere an image of solitude and of winter's approach. Its appearance gave rise to a mixed impression, sweet and sad, too analogous to my age and lot for me not to make the connection. I saw myself at the decline of an innocent and unfortunate life, my soul still full of vivacious feelings, and my mind still bedecked with a few flowers, but flowers already wilted by sadness and dried up by worries. Alone and forsaken, I felt the coming cold of the first frosts, and my flagging imagination no longer filled my solitude with beings formed according to my heart. Sighing, I said to myself, "What have I done here below? I was made to live, and I am dying without having lived. At least it has not been my fault, and I will carry to the author of my being, if not an offering of good works which I have not been permitted to perform, at least a tribute of frustrated good intentions, of healthy feelings rendered ineffectual, and of a patience impervious to the scorn of men." I was moved by these reflections. I went back over the movements of my soul from the time of my youth, through my mature age, since having been sequestered from the society of men, and during the long seclusion in which I must finish my days, I mulled over all the affections of my heart with satisfaction, over its so tender but blind attachments, over the less sad, the consoling ideas on which my mind had nourished itself for some years, and with a pleasure almost equal to that I had in giving myself up to this musing, I prepared to remember them well enough to describe them. My afternoon was spent in these peaceful meditations, and I was coming back very satisfied with my day, when at the height of my reverie I was dragged out of it by the event which remains for me to relate. I was on the road down from Menilmontant, almost opposite the gallant Jardinier, at about 6 o'clock, when some people walking ahead of me suddenly swerved aside, and I saw a huge Great Dane rushing down upon me, racing before a carriage. The dog had no time to check its pace or to turn aside when it noticed me. I judged that the only means I had to avoid being knocked to the ground was to make a great leap so well timed that the dog would pass under me while I was still in the air. This idea, quicker than a flash, and which I had the time neither to think through nor carry out, was my last. Before my accident, I did not feel the blow, nor the fall, nor anything of what followed until the moment I came to. It was almost night when I regained consciousness. I found myself in the arms of 3 or 4 young people who told me what had just happened to me. The Great Dane, unable to check its bound, had collided against my legs, and bowling me over with its mass and speed, had caused me to fall head first. My upper jaw had struck against a very rough pavement, with the whole weight of my body behind it, and the shock of the fall was even greater because I was walking downhill, and my head had struck lower than my feet. The carriage the dog was with was following right behind it, and would have run me over had the coachman not reined in his horses instantly. That is what I learned from the account of those who had picked me up and who were still holding me up when I came to. The state in which I found myself in that instant is too unusual not to give a description of here. A night was coming on. I perceived the sky, some stars, and a little greenery. This first sensation was a delicious moment. I still had no feeling of myself except as being over there. I was born into life at that instant, and it seemed to me that I filled all the objects I perceived with my frail existence. Entirely absorbed in the present moment, I remembered nothing. I had no distinct notion of my person, nor the least idea of what had just happened to me. I knew neither who I was, nor where I was. I felt neither injury, fear, nor worry. I watched my blood flow as I would have watched a brook flow, without even suspecting that this blood belonged to me in any way. I felt a rapturous calm in my whole being, and each time I remember it, I find nothing comparable to it in all the activity of known pleasures. They asked me where I lived. It was impossible for me to say. I asked where I was. They told me, at the Hutte Borné. They might as well have said on Mount Atlas. In succession, I had to ask what country I found myself in, what city, and what district. Even that was not enough for me to know where I was. It took me the whole distance from there to the boulevard to recall my address and my name. A gentleman I did not know, but who was charitable enough to accompany me a little way, learning that I lived so far away, counseled me to get a cab at the Temple to take me home. I walked easily and sprightly, feeling neither pain nor hurt, although I kept spitting out a lot of blood. But I had an icy shiver which made my jarred teeth chatter in a very uncomfortable way. When I reached the Temple, I thought that since I was walking without trouble, it was better to continue on foot than to risk perishing from cold in a cab. Thus I covered the half-league, from the Temple to the Rue Plâtrière, walking without trouble, avoiding obstacles and coaches, choosing and following my way just as well as I would have done in perfect health. I arrived, opened the lock they had installed at the street door, climbed the staircase in darkness, and finally entered my home without incident apart from my fall and its consequences, of which even then I was not yet fully aware. My wife's cries upon seeing me made me understand that I was worse off than I thought. I passed the night without yet being aware of or feeling my injuries. Here is what I felt and discovered the next day. My upper lip was split, on the inside, up to my nose. Outside, the skin had held firm and prevented the lip from being split completely open. 4 teeth had been pushed into my upper jaw. The whole part of my face which covers it was extremely swollen and skinned. My right thumb was sprained and very large. My left thumb hurt painfully. My left arm was sprained. My left knee was also very swollen, and a severely painful bruise totally prevented me from bending it. But with all this upset, nothing broken, not even a tooth, now in a fall like this one, that is good luck bordering on the marvelous. That very faithfully is the story of my accident. In a few days this story spread through Paris, so changed and distorted that it was impossible to recognize it in any way. I should have counted on this metamorphosis in advance. But so many bizarre circumstances were joined to it, so many obscure remarks and reticences accompanied it, they spoke to me about it in such a ridiculously discreet manner, that all these mysteries worried me. I have always hated the dark. It naturally fills me with a dread which the darkness they have surrounded me with so many years could not have diminished. Of all the unusual events of this time period, I will relate only one, but one sufficient to permit judgment about the others. M. Lenoir, Monsieur Lenoir, Lieutenant General of the Police, with whom I had never had any dealings, sent his secretary to inquire about my tidings, and to tender me pressing offers of service, which, given the circumstances, appeared to me to be of no great use for my relief. His secretary did not fail to urge me very insistently to avail myself of these offers, even going so far as to tell me that if I did not trust him, I could write directly to Monsieur Lenoir. This great eagerness, and the confidential manner which accompanied it, led me to understand that beneath it all was some mystery which I tried in vain to penetrate. Hardly that much was needed to alarm me, especially given the state of agitation my head was in from my accident and the resultant fever. I abandoned myself to 1,000 troubling and sad conjectures, and made commentaries of everything which went on around me, commentaries which were more a sign of the delirium of fever than of the composure of a man who no longer takes interest in anything. Another event occurred which completely destroyed my serenity. Madame d'Ormeaux had sought me out for some years without my having been able to guess why. Pretentious little gifts and frequent visits without purpose or pleasure showed me well enough that she had a secret goal in all that, but not well enough what that goal was. She had spoken to me of a novel she wanted to write, to present to the Queen. I had told her what I thought of women authors. She had intimated that the goal of this project was to restore her fortunes, a goal for which she needed protection. I had nothing to reply to that. She later told me that, having been unable to gain access to the Queen, she was determined to give her book to the public. It was no longer the moment to give her advice. She had not asked me for, and which she would not have followed. She had spoken of showing me the manuscript beforehand. I begged her to do nothing of the sort, and she did nothing of the sort. One fine day during my convalescence, I received this book from her completely printed and even bound. In the preface I saw such swollen praises of me, laid on so clumsily and with so much affection, that I was disagreeably impressed by them. The crude fawning which was so perceptible in it was never associated with benevolence, but that my heart could never be deceived. A few days later, Madame d'Ormeaux and her daughter came to see me. She informed me that because of a note it contained, her book was causing the greatest fuss. I had hardly noticed this note while flipping rapidly through the novel. I reread the note after Madame d'Ormeaux's departure. I examined the way it was constructed. I believe that in it I discovered the motive for her visits, her wheedlings, and the swollen praises of her preface, and I judged that there was no other goal in all of this than to dispose the public to attribute the note to me, and consequently to burden me with the blame it would attract to its author in the circumstances under which it was published. I had no means of putting an end to this fuss, and the impression it could make. The only thing I could do was not foster it by continuing to endure the vain and ostensive visits of Madame d'Ormeaux and her daughter. Here is the note I wrote to the mother for this purpose. Rousseau, not receiving any authors in his home, thanks Madame d'Ormoy for her kindness and begs her to honor him with her visits no more. She replied to me by a letter, honest in appearance, but contrived, like all those which people write to me in such cases. I had barbarously plunged a dagger into her sensitive heart, and I must believe by the tone of her letter that because of her intense and true feelings for me, she would never endure this break without dying. So it is that straightforwardness and frankness in everything are horrid crimes in the world, and I appear nasty and ferocious to my contemporaries, when I am guilty of no other crime in their eyes than that of not being false and perfidious as they. I had already gone outside several times, and had even strolled in the Tuileries quite a few times, when I saw, by the astonishment of several of those who met me, that there was still another bit of news concerning me of which I was ignorant. I finally learned that it was rumored that I had died from my fall, and this rumor spread so rapidly and so obstinately that more than 2 weeks after I had become aware of it, the king himself and the queen spoke of it as of something certain. In announcing this happy bit of news, the Avignon Courier, according to what someone had the concern to write me, did not fail on this occasion to give a preview of the tribute of outrages and indignities which are being prepared in the form of a funeral oration in memory of me after my death. This news was accompanied by an even more unusual circumstance which I learned of only by chance, and which I have not been able to learn about in any detail. It is that they had at the same time started a subscription for printing the manuscripts they would find in my home. By that I understood that they were keeping a collection of fabricated writings available just for the purpose of attributing them to me right after my death. For to think they would faithfully print any of those they would actually find is a folly that cannot enter into the mind of a sensible man, and from which 15 years of experience have only too well protected me. These observations, made one after the other and followed by many others which were scarcely less astonishing, caused my imagination, which I had believed to be calmed down, to become alarmed all over again. And this black darkness with which they relentlessly surrounded me rekindled all the dread it naturally inspires in me. I wore myself out making 1,000 commentaries of it all, and trying to understand the mysteries they rendered inexplicable for me. The only constant results of so many enigmas was to confirm all of my previous conclusions, to wit, that my personal fate and that of my reputation have been so fastened by the connivance of the whole present generation that no effort on my part could free me, since it is completely impossible for me to transmit any bequest to other ages without making it pass in this age through the hands of those interested in suppressing it. But this time I went further. The accumulation of so many fortuitous circumstances, the elevation of all my cruelest enemies favored, so to speak, by fortune, all those who govern the state, all those who direct public opinion, all the people in official positions, all the men of influence, picked and culled, as it were, from among those who have some secret animosity against me in order to concur in the common plot, this universal agreement, this is too extraordinary to be purely fortuitous. If there had been a single man who had refused to be an accomplice to it, a single event which had gone against it, a single unforeseen circumstance which had been an obstacle to it, any of that would have been enough to make it fail. But all the acts of will, all the unlucky events, fortune, and all its revolutions have made firm the work of men, and such a striking concurrence, which borders on the prodigious, cannot let me doubt that its complete success is written among the eternal decrees. Swarms of individual observations, either in the past or in the present, so confirm me in this opinion that I cannot prevent myself from henceforth considering as one of those secrets of heaven impenetrable to human reason the same work that until now I looked upon as only a fruit of the wickedness of men. This idea, far from being cruel and rending to me, consoles me, calms me, and helps me to resign myself. I do not go as far as St. Augustine, who would have consoled himself to be damned if such had been the will of God. My resignation comes, it is true, from a less disinterested source, but one no less pure, and to my mind more worthy of the perfect being whom I adore. God is just. He wills that I suffer, and he knows that I am innocent. That is the cause of my confidence. My heart and my reason cry out to me that I will not be deceived by it. Let me therefore leave men and fate to go their ways. Let me learn to suffer without a murmur. In the end, everything must return to order, and my turn will come sooner or later.